Be sure to check out mythvisionpodcast.com. Help MythVision grow, guys. Become a Patreon member. You guys will get early access to all my videos when I'm done editing them. Also, it's a small community where you guys can message me your questions and talk to me in private. You guys can also donate through PayPal and Cash App. Join the social media links down in the description. We have Twitter, Facebook, all sorts of social media. Help the community of MythVision grow. Hit the subscribe button, hit that bell so you guys are notified every time I do a live video and you don't miss any of my content. Dr. Price, I have a question, I believe, here. It says, Dear Derek, thanks. I wasn't going to ask any question, but here goes. Because everybody who donated, I wrote them in their email and said, thank you so much if you have any questions to ask Dr. Price, because a lot of them didn't have questions or didn't say anything. And some of them who said things like it gets cut off in PayPal and it didn't show all of the message. So I said, if you have any questions, write me here. And so we might end up following up next week with comments or questions from people who did donate that never wrote. He says, thanks, I wasn't going to ask a question, but here it goes. Number one, there seems to be a connection between Asherah, the consort of El, or Yahweh, El/Yahweh, with trees. So is there a link between her and the trees of life and or knowledge in the Garden of Eden? And also then perhaps with Eve as an aspect of Asherah? Question mark. If so, then the creation of Eve from Adam's rib would be a later attempt to subject Asherah to Yahweh. I've also heard that the Hebrew noun for God in the opening line of Genesis is feminine and only becomes a masculine noun later in the verse. If so, would this indicate a gloss for the original creation myth to which Yahweh was secondary? Are there any parallels in mythologies from the religion? Number two. Do you want to stop with that question?
Yeah. I wonder how, I don't know Hebrew. So in German, for instance, or Greek, you could tell by the definite article, that if it was masculine, it would be der, like der Führer. If it was feminine, it would be die, like die Zeitung, the newspaper. Why feminine? I mean, who knows? Sexual gender doesn't match grammatical gender. And if we're neuter, it would be das. But I don't know how you would tell that in Hebrew. I'm just ignorant. I know a similar sort of question comes up in that, it isn't Yahweh in Genesis chapter 1. It's Elohim. And whereas in chapters 2 and 3, the Eden story, it's both. They call him Yahweh Elohim. That's probably redactional, that it was just Yahweh originally. Well, but the ending, Elohim, is a plural ending. Now, that suffix can be used to denote great power and majesty. I think there's a similar thing in Egyptian with the pharaoh. But it seems to be intended as plurality in Genesis 1 because of the occurrence of things like, let us make man, etc., in our own image. So male and female, he created them. Does that mean I think it means they're gods and goddesses, which is why humans created in their image are males and females. The verb, however, is singular, and even though Elohim has a plural ending, and that's true throughout the Old Testament, but there are a number of places where it's plural, and it's been suggested that those were just that'd be an example of what Mark Goodacre calls editorial fatigue. That scribes are systematically changing the plural verbs to singular ones, but missed a few. Like my old friend Lynn Carter wrote a science fiction novel called Found Wanting, in which by the end of the story, you find out that in this far future world, everybody is sexually neutered, and they have reproduction in some other fashion. And then you look back and realize there weren't any personal pronouns. There was no his, her, him, her, etc. He managed to construct all these sentences without it. But there is a place or two where he didn't notice, I found as I was reading. You find that in the Gospels. And Matthew always tries to change Mark's kingdom of God to kingdom of heaven, but he missed 2 or 3. Goodacre is certainly right. It's just editorial fatigue. And so I tend to think that that's what happened, that all the Elohims took plural endings. Now, that's not male and female, though if it's plural, it does open the door to that with a pantheon of gods and goddesses. Well, Eve was originally a goddess. It's the same name as Hebe or Heba in Greek, who was one of the wives of Hercules and was a goddess in her own right, and also in some other Near Eastern mythologies. She was apparently the same as Cybele in the Phrygian religion of Attis. And that's why Adam says he named her Eve because she's the mother of all living. Well, that was a title of Oruru, the equivalent Babylonian Sumerian goddess to Asherah and Aphrodite and almost all these goddesses. So yeah, she is that. Is Adam supposed to be Yahweh? I've never really heard that suggested. I don't know how you would establish that. But she was a goddess who was, in fact, I think it was the same thing with Pandora in Greek mythology, whose name means all gifts, which would imply she was the creatrix in that particular version of the creation myth. But and that Greeks had matriarchal religion until this other group stormed in and took over and retained the goddesses, but made them subordinate to the gods. And so they become the wives or sisters of the gods. They're still there, but they're not in charge anymore. And Pandora, on this theory, was edged out of being the creator and reduced to the level of being a primordial Lucy Ricardo. With the box, actually the jar, Epimetheus says, "Oh, Lucy, I'm going to the Copa Club. Be sure whatever you do, you don't unstopper that jar." "Oh, I won't, Ricky." And then as soon as he's out the door, she opens it, and all the evils of the world come flying out of it like a volcano. Ugh. Well, that's Eve too, right? Whatever you do, don't eat that fruit. And so, with a little help from the serpent, she's, maybe it's not a bad idea. Chomp. And everything is ruined. She's Pandora too, so she might have been the creatrix, mother of all living. Come on. So that could well be.
That's interesting. Never thought about that. That's really interesting. Number 2, from the same gentleman here, says, how many of the epistles attributed to Paul does Dr. Price actually believe the person we call Paul wrote? I think I've heard Dr. Price refer to the notion that Paul may have been the wicked priest referred to in the Qumran text. Could he elaborate on this?
Well, I go along with Eisenman in thinking that Paul was the spouter of lies, not the wicked priest, who was a different New Testament era character, Ananias perhaps, and not the one with Jesus, but one later. The whole house of Annas had similar names, like hopefully one of them was an anus, but it was like the Herods there, which one? You really got to have a scorecard to keep them straight. But I do tend to think that the Dutch radicals were right. Lohman, Niebuhr, Van Manen, Bruno Bauer, and others, that that there was a famous Paul, who was some sort of a missionary, but that none of these letters are by him, not one of them, that he was so important that people wanted to steal his credibility for their writings. I mean, if I wrote, an epistle of Bob, who the heck cares? You use it for toilet paper. But if Paul, whoa, well, let's see, well, he was very famous. Let's see what he's got to say. That sounds crazy, but as I always like to remind people, if critical scholars don't think we have any Petrine letters or anything else, and there's loads of them. We got 1st and 2nd Peter, which are pretty obviously not by the Galilean fishermen. We've got the Kerygmata, or preachings of Peter. There's no way he wrote that. There's the Acts of Peter, the Apocalypse of Peter, and so on and so on. Nobody thinks these are actually Petrine, or there are yet other ones. There's a Nag Hammadi revelation of Peter, the Nag Hammadi Act singular of Peter. It's obvious why people did that, because Peter was a big name. Well, so was Paul, and that doesn't guarantee that any of these were written by him. It might have been, but you have to look at the internal indications, and there are a lot of them that would make a lot more sense if they're all Paulinist letters by people in different factions of the Pauline movement, Marcionites, Gnostics, etc., and later Catholics trying to co-opt Paul. And that's the way I best understand it. Though, let me be judicious here, I don't think the consensus of critical scholars is stupid. Most of them think that there are 7 authentic Pauline epistles. And in my Holy Fable, I exposit them as if that is so. Let's see what sense it makes if we put on those glasses. And you can make them make sense, but there's still some nagging problems in there. But my operative assumption these days is that none of them are by Paul.
So let me ask you this then, because I have fans who watch you and love this topic on Paul. Did Paul exist?
Oh, yeah. I think there's reason to believe he was the same as Simon Magus. Simon occurs in Josephus. Paul by name does not. But Acts associates Paul with the same circle of people that Josephus associates Simon Magus with, and sort of gives you the impression that just like he's a magician, or in other words, a miracle worker in Acts, he seems to be sort of a Rasputin type character, hobnobs with the royal houses, Festus, Felix, Drusilla, Bernice, and Paul, of course, meets these people, and then in the Pseudo-Clementines, where you have embedded the 2nd century document, the Kerygmata Petru, you have a debate between Peter and Simon Magus, and it's pretty clear. Simon Magus is a mask for Paul. He preaches salvation by grace. You don't have to keep the law. He never met Jesus, but was called to be an apostle by him anyway, and so forth. And even in the Simon story in Acts, it kind of looks like you're reading another version of the story of Paul bringing the offerings of the Gentiles to Jerusalem and having them thrown back in his face. So, yeah, I think that there was a Paul. We don't know which would actually have been his name, because Dettering argued, and I forget why, I got to go check this out again, that Paul, meaning little or small, was a technical term in Gnosticism. And I forget for what. I can't believe I've forgotten that. I'll have to check. But he makes a pretty interesting case that Paul could be a title. But you could also do it the other way and say that Simon was an added name because Paul and Peter had Paul was a rival of Simon Peter, and that so they decided to make Simon Paul. I don't know, but there's interesting information in the Tolet al-Yeshu also that would tend to link them up. And so, yeah, I think there was a Paul, and if there hadn't have been, why would we even have these forgeries in his name? I mean, there had to be one, whoever he was.
That's a good point. It's interesting. I know a couple guys that are in the comment section on my YouTube that actually don't think he existed at all, period. But then again, I wonder, I'd like to ask them, do you think Simon Magus exists? You know, where do you draw the line?
Yeah, and I'd like to know why they think there was no Paul. They may be right. I'd love to hear the argument.
Okay. Yeah, he says, the gentleman who asked these says, not sure I've got the above correct, so forgive me if they're confused. Also, if these questions have been asked before, then don't worry about it. I really appreciate your great channel. Keep up the great work, Francesco.
Thank you, Francesco.